Today we'll be looking at the book Why We Struck by Adewale Ademoyega. Adewale Ademoyega is one of the original planners of the failed 1966 revolution led by Major Cardinal Nzeogwu, in which the Sardauna and other prominent Nigerians were killed. It was published in 1981 by Evans Publishers. I'll be jumping straight to chapter 2, the military prelude. I was enlisted into the Nigerian Army on November 1st, 1961. Prior to that, I had appeared before the selection board, which sat in Kaduna in August of the same year. During my attendance at the selection board meeting, two events occurred to me as very significant. In the first place, it happened that the same board was to test and interview those of us who came from outside the army, and those cadets who had already been in the Nigerian Military Training College had undergone a 6-month training preparatory to their further training overseas. In this instance, only two of us came from the outside, namely Uche Chukwumerije and myself. It was actually this selection board meeting that brought us together for the first time, but we took to each other at once as if we had grown up together. When we were brought together with those cadets in the process of being tested, we observed that those of them who were northerners were more carefree and more confident of sailing through. Those from the south were so afflicted by the fear of failing that they wore a look of anxiety and bewilderment. In the course of our discussion, the cadets made it clear to us that less than half of their own group would be selected and that northerners were already billed to be 50% of the total number to be selected. Moreover, they already knew the 8 northerners to be selected, and they knew that at least 4 of those northerners would never have made it but for the quota system. This explained why they were bewildered. After all, we were all Nigerians, and there should be no cause for discrimination of any kind. It was rather surprising that the total number allowed to pass through was small, since at this time, a quick Nigerianization of the officer corps was a popular expectation. In Kaduna and inside the army, the atmosphere was a total negation of the public will. There is no doubt that the British were solidly behind the whole idea of slowing down the rate of Nigerianization of the officer corps, not only because it paid them a lot to keep their own commissioned and warrant officers here as long as possible, but also because their continued control of the armed forces helped them to continue to teleguide our political and economic development. It was they who suggested to the Sardauna Balewa government that it would take 6 full years from 1959 to Nigerianize the army completely, and that it was in the interest of the NPC oligarchy to agree to the plan. That oligarchy agreed to the plan and did nothing either to hasten the process or alter the plan. It was also the British who, having politically set up the North to be bigger than the South, planned to hand over to them an army that was more than 50% Northern. The fulfillment of that objective was already biting hard in 1961. Military aspirants from the South were frustrated. No wonder then that the army was not as insulated from politics as it seemed to outside observers. The effects of these were made crystal clear by the events of 1966 and 1967. The second important event was not unconnected with the first. Having known the feelings of the cadets, we also made an effort to know what the existing officers felt about the situation of things both outside and inside the army. We easily came to this. There was an officer who was quick to get in touch with us and introduced us to other officers. That officer was Lieutenant Emmanuel Ifejuna. It was my first time of meeting him. I had earlier learned about him in 1954 when he jumped 6 feet 8 inches and won a gold medal at the Commonwealth Games in Vancouver, Canada. He later graduated in science at the University of Ibadan, joined the army in 1960 and was commissioned the same year. Uche also graduated in economics at the University of Ibadan, and both of them had earlier met at the premier institution. Efejona received Uche and me particularly well. We discussed the political turn of events in Nigeria and unanimously came to the conclusion that the military was likely to be the only solution. We spoke to other officers, including Captain Okwechime, who encouraged us to come into the army. Later on, when I was alone with Uche, he expressed some misgivings about Ifejuna being already in the army. He explained that during a planned agitation in their days together at the University of Ibadan, Ifejuna deserted the group in the moment of action. He was therefore apprehensive that he might do the same thing in the event of a planned military action. But he's already in the army, I replied. And if such a behavior should show again, it would have to be taken care of, I concluded. Uche seemed to have agreed with me with some reservations. He kept quiet. Both of us were accepted by the board, but Uche did not turn up for enlistment into the army. His place remained vacant both on the plane from Kano to London and at the Mons Officer Cadet School, where we were to be trained for 6 months. Some months later, I met Uche on the streets of Lagos. "Why didn't you turn up?" I asked. Uche explained to me that he told the British professor at the University of Ibadan that he was going to join the army for revolutionary reasons, but the professor warned him that the army was the most conservative and least revolutionary of all national institutions. This meant that Uche would be better advised to find a much more revolutionary movement outside the army. And that did it for Uche. It was only from the British point of view, I assured my friend. Of course, Uche had already agreed with the professor, and it was pointless whipping up a dead horse. It was on October 31st, 1961 that I arrived at the military training depot Zaria for enlistment into the army. I was met on my arrival by Lieutenant Nzeogu. He was a training officer of the depot at the time. He received me so well that I was deeply touched by his humanity. I was meeting him for the first time, yet it was as if we had known each other since childhood. There was a natural rapport between us. It was Nzeogu who taught me the rudiments of military life, such as handling the gun, aiming and shooting, and such terms as the aim of the army is to destroy the enemy, whoever the enemy was, and so on. He personally supervised my initiation into the army. We were both interested in each other, became friends, and discussed heartily together. I spent a fortnight with him before I left for cadet training at the Mons Officer Cadet School in England. That was how it went with me. I came to the army with a heart pointed towards finding a solution to Nigeria's political problems. Before I was actually commissioned, I had met and established a solid relationship with 2 young officers of the army, Nzeogu and Ifejuna, whose hearts pointed in the same direction as mine. It seemed as if the 3 of us were destined to play the big and decisive role together. After I was commissioned into the Nigerian Army, I studied the institution as I saw it. My first impression, which really distressed me, was that it was not a nationalistic organization and it was far from being revolutionary. A nationalistic army would first of all be ideological. Secondly, it would be political. Thirdly, it would be patriotic. How could the Nigerian Army be ideological when it was still more than half commanded by British commissioned and warrant officers whose only purpose was a strict adherence to British norms and practices? The British Army was a monarchical army. The Nigerian Army was the same, hence the nomenclature Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment. How could the Nigerian Army be political when its progenitor, the British Army, had not intervened in British politics since 1660? That is 300 years ago. And how could the Nigerian Army be patriotic when it was foreign-inspired and foreign-led? Actually, the British themselves saw the Nigerian Army as purely mercenary. From the colonial point of view, this was true. The British looked upon the Nigerian soldiers under their command as the soldiers of fortune who had no personal stake in the continuity of the British Empire. This was the reason why they were encouraged to remain stark illiterates. Nevertheless, a new age was dawning on the Nigerian Army as more and more educated, politically conscious and revolutionary Nigerians were joining the officer corps of the army. It should be the aim of such officers to educate the Nigerian soldiers, render him politically conscious and revolutionary, so that he could serve the nation in a new and higher role.